Hi everyone! I hope you're having a fantastic spooky season so far. Whether you are listening to this on October, Summerween, or just any time you decide that it is spooky season for you. Today we are going to dive into some paranormal stories. These stories were sent to me by my friends and loved ones. I will be reading them all in first person, and we will start with my own spooky stories because I do have two spooky stories that I have experienced myself. By the way, if you hear some birds calling or singing, ignore that and I apologize for that. But for some reason the birds are very talkative today. So keep that in mind. All right, let's start with my own spooky stories. All right, let's see. I remember when I was a little girl, maybe between the ages of 7 and 10, I was taking a bath. It was in an old apartment that we were living in at the time. And I was playing with my toys because when I used to take a bath, I loved to play with my waterproof toys. So I was sitting there and I was singing, and I think I was talking to myself, or I'm not entirely sure about that because my mother used to tell me that I used to talk by myself when I was alone in my room, but whenever she asked, I would always say that I was talking to my friend, maybe an imaginary friend or maybe a ghost. I'm not sure. To this day, I'm not entirely sure, but I do remember that one time I was sitting in the bathtub playing with my toys. I suddenly felt like a hand pushed up against my back. I was facing the wall when I was sitting down and playing with my toys, and my back was facing the door that led outside to the hall. And I distinctively felt a big hand because I was small. I was a small child. A big hand just press up against my back, the middle of my back, and I thought it was my mom, maybe trying to tell me to hurry up because I used to take a long time in the bath because I was playing, and I I looked back to see if it was my mom, and there was no one there. Even the door was closed. I wasn't scared for some reason. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And then I turned back to play. I'm not entirely sure why that happened, why I wasn't scared, but I just wasn't. All right, so the second instance that I have experienced paranormal activity was when I was also small, but a little bit older, maybe between 10 and 13 years old. And I remember I was riding back home with my parents. I was in the back seat. We were coming back from eating out at a restaurant. And just as we were passing the light to go to the street where we lived, I saw a man walk right in front of the car. And he seemed to be like translucent, but I thought at the time that it was just a trick of the lights because it was nighttime. And I screamed for my father to stop. I remember my mouth opening wide, but nothing coming out. And as we went through the light, we actually went through that person, and suddenly that person was gone. And to this day, I still don't know what to make of it. because, first of all, they didn't see it. I did. And second of all, they didn't hear me, even though I was screaming in the back of the car at the top of my lungs. So that's still a mystery to me to this day. What do you think about it? Let me know in the comments. And while you do that, we're gonna go to the third story of this video. The third story was sent to me by David. And according to David, this story took place around 30 years ago, somewhere in Norfolk, England. It is titled Ghosthorse. We were driving home and it was a very dark night, but dry. Me, my mom, and sister were in the car on an old country road, barely wide enough for 2 cars, with bramble bushes on each side and farm fields beyond. The road was coming to a right-hand corner just before a railway bridge. I was actually coming from the other side as our home was just beyond this bridge. Just the other side of that corner, a big glowing white horse with long, wide, ghostly mane waving in the wind jumped over the hedge and across the road and over the other hedge right in front of the car. This is in the country, and there weren't any horses around that I knew of. My mother braked, and we all were speechless. That is until I shouted, "Did you see that? A white horse," and we all agreed that we had seen it, but since we didn't have any explanation for it, we just finished the journey home and not mentioned it again. Alright, next up I have 3 stories, if I'm not mistaken, from my friend Carla. And the first 2 stories tie into each other. These stories took place in an old house, and in the first story that I will be reading, Carla is located in the first floor of the house, in a room where she can have access and a clear view of the front door. I wanted to add that just to add context, because it's a little bit confusing the way she described it. Alright, so let's begin. The first story from my friend Carla. The staircase. So there are only 2 experiences that I would possibly consider paranormal. 3, actually. Each took place about 15 years ago when I was around 17 years old. I was home alone over the summer while my mom was at work. I had the house to myself all day. I was on the computer playing The Sims at around 3 in the afternoon when all of a sudden I heard a loud sound upstairs. As a bit of context, the house is 2 stories tall and was constructed sometime in the mid-1700s during the colonial era. We had been told by the previous owners that the house was haunted by an older woman who would often appear around the staircase, which is where she was found to have died. As unsettling as it were, my mom and I hadn't put much thought into those stories. We didn't necessarily believe in ghosts either, and we hadn't been bothered yet while living there for nearly a year. After suddenly hearing the loud sound upstairs, though, I immediately froze. I turned down the music on my game and listened quietly. I knew I was home alone. There could not possibly be anyone else in the house with me. I was ready to call either 911 or run outside for help. I assumed it absolutely had to be a break in. After about 30 seconds of silence, I began to feel at ease and like the coast was clear. I figured the sound must have been something falling over. However, that relief was short lived, as I began to hear soft footsteps slowly making their way across the old rickety floorboards towards the back of the house. I froze again and listened. At first, I thought that I could just be hearing things, but almost immediately after, I realized that wasn't the case. I saw a white mist appear before me. The air had become so cold that the most moisture of my breath was freezing over. The temperature must have dropped at least 50 degrees Fahrenheit in mere seconds, and I felt every single hair on my body stand on end. I began to shiver in the middle of a warm summer day. I was terrified. The footsteps that had originated towards the back of the house slowly crept over my head towards the front of the house. I was too scared to move. I felt like I couldn't even if I tried. I wasn't sure what to do or who I could call. How do you escape something like this? Who would believe you? Unsure what to do, I climbed beneath the computer desk and curled up into a ball for warmth. The cold was gnawing at me. I felt like I was sapping every mote of warmth in my body. I felt like it was killing me. I was shivering so violently that it hurt. My muscles ached and were cramping. As I listened, it almost sounded like the footsteps finally stopped, but I was wrong. I heard the steps begin to slowly descend the stairs. At this point, I knew there was nowhere to go, there was no way out. The front door was directly in front of the staircase, and the phone was on the wall inside the foyer just past the staircase. The phone she's referring to is the cord phone, the wall phone that we used to have in the houses. I did the only thing I could do. I closed my eyes and waited for the inevitable. I waited for it to reach the bottom of the stairs, enter the dining room, and confront me. With one last thud, the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. I listened for what felt like a lifetime, but whoever or whatever it was stopped very specifically at the foot of the stairs, right where the previous owners said an older woman fell and died. A moment later, the house suddenly felt warm again. I finally stopped shivering. I lifted my head and opened my eyes in confusion, but everything seemed normal again. Despite that, though, I hid under the desk for probably an hour just to be sure I was safe. Once I built up the courage to peer out from underneath the desk, I ran as fast as I could through the foyer and out the front door, never looking back. I didn't want to know, I didn't want to see. I was terrified. I waited outside until my mom came home about 30 minutes later, and I told her everything. She was freaked out about it because it sounded a lot like the stories we heard from the previous owners. She believed me, just wasn't happy about it. She said she always felt like there was someone in the house with us, but up until then, neither of us had experienced something like that. In fairness, I always felt something too, but I assumed it was typical being afraid of the dark. The second of Carla's story, the second part. Here we go. Why are you here? A couple of weeks later, while I was upstairs in my room, I suddenly heard some strange noises coming from the guest room again, at the back of the house on the second floor. I knew it couldn't have been my mom as she was asleep in her room with the door closed. Aside from us, nobody else was in the house. At first, I looked around my bedroom door to see if I could make out what it was. I looked down the hall and into the guest room, but it was dark. I couldn't see anything that was immediately amiss. After gathering a bit more courage, I tiptoed out into the hall, turned on the light, and took a few more steps towards the darkness beyond the guest room door. I knew what I was hearing now. Somehow, the radio was turning itself on and off, and it was cycling through stations. I could see the lights from it flickering through the darkness. At first, it mostly sounded like incoherent static, but then a faint voice emerged and spoke. It was hard to make out the words exactly, but it felt like it was asking me questions. My heart dropped and I froze. It was the voice of an older woman. Every hair on my body stood on end again. Every muscle ached and I felt cold. I turned on the guest room light, slowly backed away, and locked myself in my room for the rest of the night. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to believe it was real. I told my mom what happened the next morning, and she said she had been hearing strange things as well, but didn't want to tell me to avoid scaring me. We moved out of the house a couple months later, though for several different reasons. And now we're gonna go to Carla's third story, which is actually not related to the two stories that we have read so far. But here it is. Links. I do actually have one third paranormal story that I just remembered that is less scary. My best friend, my cat Lynx, passed away in 2019. When he first left me, I felt so cold and empty. I couldn't stop crying. When I got home from the vet after he passed away, I playfully, in my head, reached out to him emotionally. It is hard to explain, but I basically asked him to stay with me. I needed him. I couldn't think. I couldn't sleep. I didn't think it would actually work. Instantly, though, I felt him with me. I felt a warm light wash over me. I felt him with me. I stopped crying and smiled and cradled him like he was in my arms. I could finally fall back asleep. A couple of days later, out of habit, I accidentally called his name out loud, as I always used to, and he always came to me when I called him. I caught myself immediately after and started crying again. As soon as I did, though, the light in my room flickered and I felt the warmth again. I knew he was there. Even right now, I feel the warmth when I emotionally call for him. It is like a fuzzy butterfly feeling in my chest. Oh, that was sweet. That last one was sweet. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed these paranormal stories. If you would like me to read your own paranormal stories here on my channel in a video, please let me know and send them to me via my email, which I will put down below. Tell me what you think about these paranormal stories. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for subscribing, for sharing, for commenting and liking. And I will see you on our next video. Angelic Blessings. Bye.